Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, happy Monday to you. It is Eclipse Monday. Of course, we have the solar eclipse. I think we get, about 85% partial visibility here in Metro Atlanta. So there'll be some folks. In fact, my roommate says he's going to watch the eclipse from the 7th floor pool and hot tub area this afternoon. Okay, that's one way to do it. Here in Metro Atlanta, this is also the 50th anniversary of Henry Aaron's historic 715th home run hit. We'll touch on that a little bit. Me being a sports guy and a Braves fan, just a monumental occasion. I was about a month and a half old when it happened, so I don't have personal recollections of it, but still an occasion that many in Metro Atlanta do remember throughout the country and the world as well. So that's going to be a big deal with the Braves taking on the New York Mets later tonight. What else do we have to discuss? It's been a while since I've even been on the air, since I took last week off, and so I'm refreshed, invigorated, and ready to go. I want to dive into the very first thing that comes to my mind, however, and that is a discussion that continues to be somewhat heated and leaving people perplexed as to what direction the city of Atlanta, Mayor Andre Dickens' office, and MARTA, what direction they're all going when it comes to mass transit inside the city of Atlanta and throughout Metro Atlanta, honestly. And today actually begins a 6-week period where I think we're going to learn where a patchwork of transit can be a real headache, real confusing, a real pain in the ass for those who need to get to a destination. And what I mean by that is the MARTA airport station, as of 4 a.m. this morning, it's closed. Let me run this piece from last night's WXIA-TV 11 Alive, 11 p.m. newscast.
If you use public transportation to get to the airport, your commute is about to change in a huge way. In just a few hours, the MARTA airport station will be shut down for 6 weeks. 11 Alive's Teresa Bowles found out some riders had absolutely no idea. She took a ride today. She's live at the airport with the very latest. What can you tell us, Teresa?
Well, Ron, I'm at the arrivals tunnel, and the renovations are so crews can renovate the platform levels as well as the concourse of that station. And it all starts at 4 in the morning. MARTA is getting a makeover.
I really just heard about it.
Signs and screens at the stations spread the news of a shutdown at the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport stop for 6 weeks.
The cost that they shedding down is going to convert your your commute.
That's right. This isn't just going to affect airline passengers. This is going to affect those who work at the airports. After all, if you're running slightly behind on catching your flight, you definitely want to make sure that the TSA gate agents get to work on time, because that'll only set you further behind, right?
A representative from MARTA said during the closure, work will include replacing floor tiles as well as preparing the site for a new canopy structure. While some younger riders are in good spirits about it, do you have anything to say? Others, such as Brandon Beatty, are worried about how they're going to cover their tracks on the job.
I hope everybody get to work on time, because it's not going to be good.
Despite a few warnings, Beatty still had no idea until I told him. The alternative, MARTA is offering bus shuttles to and from the airport.
I'm flying back tomorrow, which means that's the first time I'm going to use the shuttle.
Chuba Dwankanith only wishes there was more communication.
Frequent travelers might know it better. If you have the app, they might know it better. But people like me who travel maybe once in a while, it's very different.
By the way, I'm going to go ahead and predict Lyft and Uber drivers are going to make bank the next 6 weeks.
Yet veterans Caitlin DeJoya and little Thea are more concerned about how often these shuttles will show up, especially when chugging a stroller along.
Having it run super frequently would be great. I don't know how frequently it'll run, but hopefully people won't have to wait very long for a shuttle.
To keep track, riders hope the train will send alerts.
I think that would help, just sending push notifications through the app and making use of technology.
As millions of people depend on MARTA.
I think people will really see the value of MARTA with not having access to the airport for a few months.
Yes, she's absolutely right. There's FOMO, and then there's just Mo, missing out. We're going to find out for the next 6 weeks, and probably 8 if we're being honest, what it's like to not have MARTA take you directly to the airport. A lot of inconvenience for passengers and for employees at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, for sure.
If you're planning to fly out anytime soon, MARTA reps suggest that you allow yourself 30 extra minutes to get to the airport. Live in Atlanta, Teresa Bowles.
WXIA-TV 11 Alive on that story. So let me pivot now to what the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is telling those of us who need to know airport transportation options. Kelly Yamanuchi on the story there. Let me just get right to the meat of this. Officials are recommending riders allow an extra half an hour to get to Hartsfield-Jackson on MARTA. An extra half an hour to get from College Park's MARTA station to the Atlanta airport. Something that would take, 4 to 6 minutes tops. An extra half an hour. Yes, that's right. An extra half an hour to get to the airport. That's less sleep if you work at the airport. It means you got to get up earlier. It means it could affect you getting your kids off to school. This is going to be a bit of a headache. MARTA Service Twitter sharing that the airport station temporarily closed today, April 8th through May 19th. I think it'll be later. Shuttle service between College Park Station and the Atlanta Airport North Terminal operates daily from 4 a.m. until 2 a.m. the next day. Please allow an extra 30 minutes for travel. I mean, not only is there the delay added when you have to stop at College Park, wait for a shuttle bus, and you will likely have to wait. They're not just going to be lined up in a loop there. And by the way, it's not exactly like they have dedicated lanes like BRT lanes. They're going to be at the whim of stoplights and traffic and accidents, just like everybody else traveling between College Park and Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. It's you also have to get off the MARTA train with your luggage if you're traveling and wait on a platform for the bus and then load the luggage. And by the way, wait for everybody else to load their luggage onto the same shuttle bus to get to the airport. This is going to be 6 to 8 weeks. I'm thinking 8 to 9 weeks of some real headaches for those who are used to using MARTA to get to and from the airport. Again, I think the Lyft and Uber folks that live in Metro Atlanta and make that at least a source of some, if not all of their income, are going to make a lot of money for the next 6 to 8 weeks. So this is where I start to get on my soapbox, because I think we all see the inherent value of having mass transit to venues of necessity for those that live in the city of Atlanta and those who don't live in the city of Atlanta, who don't have MARTA coming to their doorstep or to their neighborhood or to their bedroom community. We don't, of course, have a high-speed or even a moderately speed rail network, passenger network throughout the state of Georgia either. Folks who live in Augusta either take a commuter flight or take a van shuttle, adding vehicles to the interstates that are already clogged once you get inside 285. We're going to see one of those situations. Again, this isn't FOMO. This is just flat out missing out. I think folks are going to start to understand. And again, this is like one of those lessons that we'll learn that we'll forget about once it's all out of the way. Oh, that was a headache for 6 to 8 weeks, but boy, am I glad that's over. Yeah, except we should have learned a lesson that not having it really does make for some inconveniences that we're just absorbing societally, instead of saying, no, why don't we improve upon this, y'all? Why is this just a thing for those inside the city of Atlanta? You know, when Taylor Swift had her, 3 days of concerts at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in the last 6 months or so, the folks who lived outside the city of Atlanta loved MARTA. They loved it. They're like, wow, I wish we had that. Yeah, you do wish you had this, don't you? Because it helps you get to venues of importance. But it's also something that helps all of Metro Atlanta get to not just venues of importance, but just throughout the area. I'm going to wander into a bit of a debate that began, and it's been going on for months now, the Beltline Rail yes or Beltline Rail no argument that's been taking place, and the mayor threw some kerosene on that with his State of the City address a couple of weeks ago, where he mentioned the new MARTA infill stations, but didn't mention Beltline Rail, which he has been somewhat supportive of in the past, but hasn't said a whole lot about since he said what he said about these infill stations. Because the question was, well, if MARTA's got money for those infill stations, does that mean that the Beltline money's being diverted to it? Because MARTA famously has said for the last year or so that all the projects that they wanted to do on the 2016 ballot measure, they're not going to be able to do. They've been scaling it back into fractions of what they said they were going to do from the jump. So our friends over at the Georgia Gang on WAGA Fox 5 Sunday mornings, they had a nice long discussion about this. And one of the key personnel in the implementation of Atlanta's transit plan and the Beltline rail was Kathy Woolard, who sat on the city council back then when this was being discussed. First, I'm going to let moderator Lori Geary set the table for that entire conversation, as heard yesterday.
Last week's show, you missed fiery debate over MARTA's future plans. I'd advise you to go back and watch. Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens announced plans for 4 new MARTA stations as the transit agency looks to expand on the Beltline. Phil, let's kind of pick up where we left off last week, because this is not an agency that is flush with cash. Can MARTA afford all of these new plans, and what should be the priority? And what about the Beltline?
Well, first, I think the big question was that my two colleagues were going after each other last week was what does rail mean for the Beltline? Do we want connected rail, or do we want rail right on the Beltline, which is it's not really a loop. As I was doing my research, it's more like a U. I understand that the city doesn't own all of the Beltline, although Lori, MARTA over the last 2 or 3 years now does have some money. I actually studied where the 4 new stations are, and they look like 4 quadrants of the city that are just right placed for people to get connected with the Beltline. So I think that the Mayor Andre Dickens, with this debate going on, at some point soon is going to have to take a stand. I admired him for taking a stand on the police training facility. He was bold. Let's be bold on this one, Mr. Mayor.
Oh my God, I'm agreeing with Phil Kent. What is happening in this world? No, he's right. The mayor has to clarify his position, because he really threw a lot of into the conversation when he announced the infill stations, but hasn't said a word since this debate has really gotten, as Lori mentioned, more fiery since the infill stations news dropped during his State of the City address, but he didn't address Beltline rail and hasn't since.
There appears to be 2 separate groups that we're talking about, those for transit on the Beltline and then those who are opposed. Opponents say that expanding rail on the Beltline would mean like many years of construction, the high cost of light rail they're talking about. And supporters say, though, that this is the way to connect the 45 neighborhoods along the Beltline.
Yeah, so there's a lot to say about all of this, but first we need to know is that the Beltline started as a transit project.
Yes.
We rezoned, as I said last week, all the neighborhoods around it to transit-oriented density 20 years ago, because that's what MARTA said was needed to put transit on the Beltline. Right. Now we have phenomenal traffic congestion, and people can't even get around these neighborhoods because we've built this sort of wall of density. But what's important to understand is that when I started as transportation chair, the city had no transportation plan whatsoever. We did not even have transportation staff. 20 years later, we're not much better off.
Right.
And so when the mayor comes out and says, in a speech, oh yeah, we're going to build 4 infill stations, but there's no long-range plan for what that means or why we would do it. We're still doing this thing where we're like sort of jabbing things in the dark.
So true.
Transportation plans take a long time to plan, implement, and sort of have it connected to the whole. And so while these may be good, they have no studies behind them. There's no basis for understanding why you would put them there, and they're incredibly expensive. So let's get back and have a plan. And what MARTA has not done is do the kind of study you need to do to say how can we do this? What's the technology? How fast can it go? How fast can we put it in? And when can we start? And if they did an RFP with a private company for that, I think they'd find out. But they have no capacity on staff to do this themselves.
She's right. She's absolutely right. So I'm going to put a pin in this because we're going to come back and continue this conversation. Got to take a quick break, though, as we dive into the conversation on whether or not Atlanta does need Beltline rail or not. The Ron Show here on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast. By the way, you probably notice, I hope you notice anyway, that in the show itself here on The Ron Show, don't do a whole lot of commercial breaks. Many or any, as a matter of fact. I try and keep this as chock full of information and conversation as possible. So in order to do that, a lot of this is a personal out-of-pocket expense. And I'm wondering if you might be willing to, donate to help recoup some of those costs. That would be fantastic. If not, that's cool. Just keep listening. We're doing this on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com. You can listen on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com or via podcast on your preferred platform. But there is a donate tab. Yeah, you can do that. That'd be super nice. RonShowATL.com for that. So we were talking about Beltline Rail and the necessity or the perceived lack of necessity for it. I have some thoughts on that. Having lived in New Orleans for a little while, I think a lot about the French Quarter. There's no mass transit whatsoever that leads to the French Quarter, and parking is hard to find. It causes a lot of headache for those who live in and around the French Quarter, and it's pretty costly for those who want to go to the French Quarter and need to find a satellite parking spot. We're starting to see this actually happen along the east side trail of the Beltline. And make no mistake, the Beltline is not the French Quarter, but it's becoming quite popular. It is a draw for those who don't live in the neighborhoods. And what I think is short-sighted about those who are kind of doing the whole NIMBY approach, I'm thinking of the Inman Park folks who are, I don't want this. Here's what you're going to have. You're going to have a lot of folks who want to come visit the Beltline who are going to be parking at either satellite parking lots. You're going to start seeing a lot more of those spring up. And we know how parking lots around a major venue. Remember Fulton County Stadium? No development around it and how the neighborhood became blighted? Yeah, you start to see that. Or you're just going to start seeing a lot of cars lining up in front of your house because the city's probably going to have to start relaxing, no parking rules on some of the smaller streets around the Beltline. Just keep that in mind. Let me pivot back to the conversation that was being had on yesterday's Georgia Gang, which aired on WAGA Fox TV.
A MARTA study that I looked up found a 3-mile segment, and I think the study was done in 2022. So a 3-mile segment of the Beltline from Pond City Market to Lindbergh would cost almost $500 million. Are there better, less expensive options out there?
There are, and let's talk about that segment, that east side trail, which is very walkable. Transit, you see scooters, you see people running, you see people walking, but there was a group of business owners there that came out and opposed what Kathy is supporting, which is to have rail on the Beltline. And the reason they oppose it is that, look, I'm not going to debate Kathy and Shirley Franklin and Ryan Gravel, and there was others, that talked about a loop in Atlanta before Ryan Gravel and Kathy and Shirley came up with that. But the one thing that Kathy will not tell you is that we also talked about infill stations. And when Phil says that the mayor hasn't taken a stand, well, this was sort of a stand. He didn't get into this mass debate, but these infill stations were in a study that was done about how you can expand transit in Atlanta. And it also was in the More MARTA project, which I know Kathy that overwhelmingly vote of 2016 voters said we're going to basically do a half a penny to basically have a More MARTA project. And those projects are working. And I got a long list of here, $55 million for airport station renovation, 5 Points platform, $50 million, $41 million in Indian Creek. The list goes on and on. Look at what they're doing in Brookhaven, look what they're doing in Sandy Springs. So now let's get into what this really is about. It's about prioritization. And I think the mayor has prioritized, we're going to fully invest in a affordable infill stations that will basically get people to the Beltline. But also when we talk about transit, we also got to talk about equity, and we also got to talk about affordability, right? Because if you go back to what Shirley Franklin said recently, the original intent of the Beltline was about connecting neighborhoods, and Kathy believes that too. But dropping in a rail system on a portion of the Beltline, which the business owners don't want, and is in the most affluent areas of the Beltline, is one thing. What are we going to do about the South Side? And then lastly, this, Lori, is that I believe that the Atlanta Beltline Partnership, Broad Brunner, Atlanta Beltline Inc., Clyde Higgs are doing a good job to complete the loop. And let's continue to put funding towards there. They're ahead of schedule, and they've definitely got the funding for that.
I'm coming to.
Okay, hang on. Before we go to anybody else, Theron just sort of does a lot of the misinformation part that I think leaves people confused, honestly. There is not going to be rail on the Beltline. People hear that. No, I think they do. You have to be careful in how you say this. There's not going to be rail on the Beltline. If you walk the Beltline, you'll see that there is a lot of weed growth and brackish fauna and flora off to the side. That's right. There's this big green patch between any building or park or whatever and the actual concrete Beltline itself. Hello, that's where it's going. That's where the rail would go. And again, we have to remember, folks, this isn't going to be MARTA rail. This is going to be the quiet streetcar or a version of the quiet streetcar. And to Lori's point about a $500 million spent on a portion of the Beltline transit, okay, we can sit here and argue about the costs of doing it, or we can argue about the costs of not doing it. We could also talk about how, just the I-16, I-75 interchange that they've been working on since 2017, by the way, in the Macon area. That cost $500 million. We never bat an eyelash about major highway construction costing $500 million. But the impact of spending $500 million on extending Beltline Rail from Ponce City Market, which, by the way, would connect to downtown Atlanta, to Ponce City Market, to the Lindbergh Station up in the Buckhead area, like that has intrinsic value. Look at it this way. It provides an opportunity. Say you live in the Lindbergh area and you want to get to work. You now have not just the MARTA rail option, you also have the streetcar option to get to work if you work downtown, or maybe you work in the Ponce City Old Fourth Ward area. And instead of having to get in the car and try and make your way down gridlock on Monroe Avenue or 85 to the downtown connector at 75 and 85, which we know becomes a parking lot at key points during the day, you also have another mass transit rail option. And let's not even, let's discuss the Amsterdam Walk project. There was a big meeting about that. I say a big meeting. It was a very small meeting, actually, seeking some neighborhood input on the Amsterdam Walk project that's going to be built on Monroe near Piedmont Park, which is going to be adding hundreds of apartments without any additional driveways in and out, just the one. But the Beltline Rail will be running right adjacent to it. Stand by, back after this.
Want to be on the show? Have a cause or campaign you'd like to speak up for? Email Ron at ronshowatl.com or call 404-919-2725. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Thank you so much for listening. I know I've kind of gone off the rail a little bit talking about Beltline Rail, but this is such an important conversation that needs to be had because this feels like one of those situations where another one of those situations in this country where we start a major project, we have a grand vision for something, and then we scale it back. We decide, oh, well, I think we're kind of okay with this. This is a half measure. I'm watching a great TV series, by the way, on Apple TV Plus called Manhunt. It is basically a theatrical adaptation of what happened in the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, the literal manhunt for John Wilkes Booth, and also, by the way, a parallel conversation being had about Reconstruction and how President Andrew Johnson, once ushered in and sworn into office, he from the South, decided to scale back Reconstruction and was pulling back on the 40 acres and a mule and the land grants, et cetera, and so on. And do we not see the lasting impacts of that even still? I mean, it's not 1865, it's not 1965, it's not 100 years later, it's almost 100 and, let me do my math real quick, 160 years. I mean, we're still dealing with the repercussions of that failed policy decisions that were made in the immediate aftermath of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in the 1860s, y'all. And I'm not sitting here saying that, like, just kind of taking a half measure with the Beltline is going to have nearly the ramifications, but here we are at a pivotal moment in Metro Atlanta, okay? We are now the 6th largest metropolitan area in the country, in the nation. We have the largest mass transit authority in the country to not get a dime of state funding. And again, Lori Geary, the moderator at the Georgia Gang on Fox 5 WHA TV, mentioned, there's a $500 million price tag on a portion of Beltline Rail. Yes, no doubt about it. But you know what? Again, there's not a dime of state funding going into any of this in the first place. And wouldn't that be helpful? I'm going to go back because Kathy Woolard, who again sat on city council when this was conceptualized and put onto paper and into effect, has more to say. And she makes a valid point. I mean, I kind of get why she gets some pushback for what she said, but what she said, I actually still applaud anyway.
I got to just say one thing about these business owners that oppose it. They would not have businesses there were it not for the Beltline.
Yes.
Right? There was nothing there.
That's right.
Well, Janelle, there wasn't. It was a rail corridor. Yep. It was empty. There was nothing there. Sorry, I thought you did. There was nothing there. And so to say that they're opposing it now, they built what they got. They're making tons of money, and now they don't want what was on the plan. I don't think people should be listening to that because those of us who have been waiting, for this train to come, are finding it pretty offensive that, people who are making that money on that aren't.
Well, the one last point, too, that also 20 years ago, Kathy, you, Ryan, and Shirley, and others, y'all didn't know that micromobility was going to be to where it was. No, we didn't know that we were going to take Lime scooters and people were going to basically get around on a skateboard. I mean, the basically the 20-year sort of advancement of how you interpret transit in this city has changed. And
okay, sorry. I'm sorry. Theron, again, I'm sitting here finding myself in shock that I'm disagreeing with Theron Johnson on much, but dude, scooters are not transit. I'm sorry. No. As a matter of fact, folks are using scooters now on the roads, not the sidewalks, because that's not what sidewalks are for. Sidewalks are called sidewalks, not side scoots. So people are using these rental scooters on the roads. And when I say, I'm not talking like just your little streets in residential subdivisions. No, I was literally coming back from an event last night, Sunday night, on Monroe Avenue. Monroe Avenue, the same Monroe Avenue they're going to build this big monstrous Amsterdam walk project on if it passes. And there were two dudes on scooters in the dark because there's no bike lane. You're not supposed to be on the sidewalk with them. That's their idea of transit. But that's not mass transit. No, you can't sit here and talk about how, well, we didn't foresee folks were going to be renting scooters and e-bikes 20 years ago. That has nothing to do with Atlanta's need for mass transit. Are you advocating, sir, for more scooters to get around Metro Atlanta or inside the city of Atlanta? Sorry, man, that is asinine.
And I think those business owners are saying, hey, it's safe. We're not talking about people getting jacked on the Beltline anymore. We're not, we install security companies. I mean, we're talking about people who are restaurants, businesses. And then also I read if you put a rail system there, how are the businesses going to get across the Beltline to get to the other country? One of the things that the business
they're going to walk. They do that in other cities all over.
I think
she's absolutely right. This is, oh my God, Theron, dude, you haven't done your homework, man. I'm sorry. Oh, I read somewhere. No. It's not like these trains are going to be in embedded tracks or it's confusion. It's not like when you go to a subway station and you can't get to the other side of the subway station because there's that deep trench where the trains are. That's not the kind of rail you're getting here, man. And if you're on a panel discussion to discuss this, you should already know that. Kathy points that out. No, this is being done in other cities all the time. And I can't believe I'm sitting here telling a Democratic individual, someone who works and consults with Democratic candidates and campaigns and causes, that using the crime trope, we're not seeing people jacked up on the Beltline. Dude, that is the criminal element argument that those who have pushed back against having mass transit expansion in Cobb County and Gwinnett County, northern Fulton County, that's the excuse that they use, and it's wrong-headed. It's a dog whistle. I can't believe I'm saying this to Theron Johnson. That is just incorrect babble. We haven't heard from Janelle King on the panel about this yet, but let's let her weigh in.
There's a business conversation to be had. You absolutely listen to the businesses, because without the businesses, the people have nothing to do when they're walking around. There's a study that talks about blue zones, which are, areas where people live for 90 and plus. And in those areas, it's mostly walkable communities. When I look at how MARTA's doing this, you absolutely have to pay attention to what the businesses are saying. You can't just ignore the people who are the economic stimulators and tell them that we're going to ignore how you feel and what's happening to you.
Sorry, Janelle, but the economic stimulators are not the businesses on the Beltline. The Beltline brought the businesses there in the first place. Thus, the Beltline is the economic stimulator.
The decisions that are being made are being, from a business, especially a small business perspective, are being made because they already know what the financial hit is going to be to their business, to the area, to the community, if they go another direction. So that's why I'm not a fan of adding railway to the Beltline.
So I'm sorry. She again points to the economic hit the business is going to face with the addition of the rail. She's again sort of conflating here. There's construction that might be an issue with businesses, but again, if you opened a business on the Beltline, if you bought a house or a townhome or a condo on the Beltline, and you were not made aware or did not do the awareness research yourself to know what the Beltline project was, and that transit was always, from day one, a part of the DNA, the blueprint for the Beltline. Again, this is a real estate term. We call it buyer beware. If you weren't aware of it, that's on you. I'm not buying that. Most, if not all, of the businesses along the Beltline abso-damn-lutely knew that rail was a component. And also, what about the days when the weather sucks? Do businesses not want folks being able to get to and from their business when it's 34 degrees and windy or raining or some mix therein? Of course they want the business then too. But how are people going to get to it? Georgia Gang moderator Lori Geary proposes maybe an alternative to light rail on the Beltline.
Things like, okay, if you don't want to build all that infrastructure with, the expensive amount with light rail, could you do like the tech trolley, right? Something along those lines to get people moving.
Well, that's why they need to go ahead and put the RFP out there and find out what companies would propose to do. We have been sitting here for 20 years. MARTA has funding from 8 years, that half a cent that they asked me to help promote because it was going to put transit on the Beltline, and now they're not doing it. 8 years, and they haven't even asked the question about what does this really cost.
Right, but I'm half of MARTA real quick. MARTA has not come out and said they don't support rail or transit on the Beltline. I think what they're saying, they are doing a study, by the way. They are not doing the RFP private study that you're talking about.
They're doing the same study we did 20 years ago.
They are doing a study. So I just want to say that they're looking at it. And same thing the mayor said. Let's bring the groups together. And I hope that everyone will look at this conversation to figure out the economic impact, but also making sure that we don't lose the affordability component to this, right?
So, okay, fine and well. Listen, if we're going to have this conversation about the impact, we've got to stop talking about short-term impact. And I'm not sitting here saying I'm not trying to be belligerent or dismissive of whatever headaches that businesses say that they're going to deal with in the short term. But you've got to start thinking about the long term. The long-term effect, not just on the businesses. First of all, again, as I mentioned, you're going to have those days, several days on the calendar, like what, 40% in 40% here in Metro Atlanta, where the weather's not going to be cooperative with meandering along the Beltline. You're going to want some other method to get there. And that method right now, the alternative, if you're not walking or scooting or skating, is to take a car. And we're already seeing pay satellite lots and getting booted on them, by the way. And we're starting to see congestion on residential thoroughfares. And we're starting to see people parking in front of homes. And I'm going to tell you something, y'all. That doesn't increase your value. The thing is, we're seeing an increase in value along the Beltline now because folks want to live adjacent to that, air quotes, amenity. But when folks start parking in front of your house, yeah, your value starts taking a tumble. When you start holding open houses to sell your house, again, you're talking to a realtor here, and you've got all kinds of folks lined up and down the street parking because this is where they park to go to the Beltline. Well, where do your open house customers park? And is that a deterrent for them when they think about buying that home? Got to think long-term, NIMBYs. And businesses too. You got to think long-term. This is not going to be good for your business if you think short-sightedly about, the impact of a year and a half or so of construction. People are still going to come. The Beltline is that popular, right? And again, this isn't like construction on the Beltline. It's on the side of the Beltline. Enough of the Inman Park NIMBYs. Let me pivot over now to the Virginia Highland Morningside NIMBYs, who I'm actually kind of with here on this a little bit. There's this massive project, this Amsterdam Walk, that opponents say is incompatible with Virginia Highlands and Morningside Lennox aesthetic, but also the traffic component is what I think kind of dovetails into the conversation we're having here. I'm reading from GPB's Diana Bagby, who reported on this meeting that took place about a week ago. Portman Holdings plans to transform Amsterdam Walk from a small-scale shopping center, which, by the way, was kind of a traffic headache because it only had the one-way in and the one-way out, a two-lane road, into a large mixed-use development adjacent to the Atlanta Beltline, where there is no rail right now, but would be at some point in time, is incompatible with surrounding single-family neighborhoods, according to some residents. And again, neighborhoods where people that are going to need to get to and from this new development going to park. So get this is kind of sad. And I think this has a lot to do with misinformation or lack of information about these sort of meetings. About 20 people from Virginia Highlands and Morningside Lennox neighborhoods met March 27th with Mike Green, Senior Vice President of Development at Portman. The roundtable discussion, and you really, with 20 people and this guy, you could have had it on one table. That's not a good turnout. Anyway, roundtable discussion held at the Red Light Cafe and Amsterdam Walk was set up by Green to answer questions and clear up any misinformation floating on social media. Residents at the meeting repeated their frustrations and fears about Portman's plans to redevelop the approximately 10-acre site nestled between Piedmont Park and their neighborhoods with 900 apartments, read 900 vehicles, and about 500,000 square feet of retail and office space. More retail and office space than Amsterdam Walk currently, or in its heyday as a retail and, a retail we're talking multi-level office buildings and retail on the ground floor. The proposal includes 2 high-rise buildings, a 13-story office tower, 17-story apartment building, and more than 1,000 parking spaces. Charlie Cafton told Mike Green here, this will turn Morningside into Atlantic Station 2 or Buckhead 2. How does this fit in? He said, it doesn't. Reading again from GPB's article, another person said the heights of the buildings are inappropriate and would be an eyesore. The development would stand out like a growth amid the greenery of the park, Atlanta Botanical Garden, and manicured lawns of single-family homes. Noted. No, I'm not going to disagree with that. I kind of understand what they're saying. The aesthetic is going to be a little different. Then there's the traffic. This is what I want to focus in on here because we're talking about mass transit. And again, this is going to be adjacent to the Beltline where we're debating whether or not there needs to be a rail component. Then there's the traffic. The main entrance into Amsterdam Walk is Amsterdam Avenue off Monroe Drive. Traffic on Monroe is already a burden, several people said. I'm co-signing that. Adding 900 apartments and an office building and retail on the site with one main entrance and exit would force people to drive over Monroe and onto residential streets. This is where I would say, City of Atlanta, if Portman Holdings wants to do this project, and I'm not saying that we should sign off on it in the first place, but if Portman Holdings wants to do this, I heard something about there being a $500 million price tag for the Beltline rail extension. Portman Holdings should be maybe levied an impact fee to help accommodate the construction of that Beltline rail because obviously we're going to need it if they build this project. Continuing to read here from GPB, a traffic study estimates the development would add nearly 4,000 daily new car trips. Daily! The city's planned redesign of Monroe Drive will be completed before construction begins should the project move forward and would mitigate many traffic concerns. According to the report, easy access to the Beltline is also expected to take cars off the street. Not if there's not Beltline rail. And can I just say, while in theory, I'm with the NIMBYs here from Morningside, Lenox, and Virginia Highlands about the aesthetic and the traffic. Trust me, I get it. You're seeing the long range future of this development. We also have to talk about the fact that Atlanta is becoming a more dense city, and we're becoming a more populous city, and more people are coming, y'all. Like, 1.2 million more residents between now and 2040? We got to find places for them. We got to find spaces for them. We've got to make better use of land. And I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with Portman wanting to put apartments here, but I get the argument for and against this. I'm just saying that we've got to figure out ways to do better when it comes to transit because we're all having trouble getting around inside and around the city of Atlanta right now as it is, and we're just adding the density as we talked about that wall of density along the East Side Trail Beltline, and that'll continue throughout the rest of the Beltline as well in some spots anyway. And MARTA's starting to develop, livability around their rail networks too, but this is still going to be adding cars, y'all. We've got to start thinking long range about the impact of the density without the mass transit component being added to it as well. We're hitting the home stretch of the Ron Show. Thank you so much for listening, whether it's on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or via podcast. And thank you for letting me take a little break last week. I needed it. Kind of get some other work done and take a little bit of just a mental respite from all things going on. I figured it was a good week since the General Assembly session just ended and there wasn't a whole lot going on politically, but there's always a conversation to be had. It stymies me a little bit that Mayor Andre Dickens is on the Atlanta Regional Commission. In fact, he is like the head of the Atlanta Regional Commission. I think he was just elected, president of the Atlanta Regional Commission. And yet, instead of fostering a comprehensive discussion about Metro Atlanta and its mass transit needs, its transit needs in general, he's just, again, throwing kerosene on conversations and really muddying the conversation on mass transit within the city limits. And here he is as head of the Atlanta Regional Commission, which needs to have a broader conversation about its transit needs. Got to do better. You know, another story that I want to share here that hit recently over the weekend, Fulton County Animal Services has suspended its control services inside the city of Atlanta after Fulton County Animal Control and the city failed to reach a deal. I'm going to give you this from WANF-TV, Atlanta News First.
Well, time is up. Fulton County has just cut off animal control services for the entire city of Atlanta.
It is the fallout from a months-long squabble over money. Atlanta News First reporter Chelsea Beimfohr is live at 5 at the Fulton County Government Center on Fulton Industrial. And Chelsea, what happens next here?
Oh my God.
Well, guys, essentially this means that all animal control calls must now come through the city rather than the county. But it's unclear if Atlanta has the resources to handle this and where they may end up taking abandoned or abused cats and dogs.
We're building a brand new $120 million plus Atlanta public safety training facility. I mean, we seem to have the campus for it once that's developed, right? Just an idea, just spitballing here. But why are we at this point in the first place? This is a disaster.
But in the end, the city left us with no other option.
On Friday, Fulton County leaders announced they're halting all animal control service to the city of Atlanta. For months, the two government entities have been trying to negotiate a new multi-million-dollar contract, but commissioners say Atlanta doesn't want to pay.
The city of Atlanta still has not provided a signed intergovernmental agreement to Fulton County for animal services as of this afternoon.
As Commissioner Rob Pitts, by the way, on the Fulton County Board of Commissioners, where's the Atlanta Police Foundation to cut a check when you need one?
Deadline now passed. Fulton commissioners say it's a liability for them to keep providing animal control service to the city without a signature from Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens. But the city and some constituents say the services provided by the county were not adequate anyway.
I'm baffled that they expect taxpayers to pay for a service we're not going to get, and they are putting in the news that we'll cut off Atlanta. Well, we're not getting the service, so what are you cutting off? What's the difference?
But without any animal control service, some fear there could be a public safety threat, including Fulton commissioners.
We are deeply concerned about their ability to provide services. We don't know if they have the ability to do it. We hope that they will. And we stand ready. I can speak, I think, for the three of us and all of the board when I say we stand ready to reinstitute services the minute we have a signed IGA and are legally allowed to do so.
And we have reached out to the mayor's office for comment and to ask if they are prepared to answer these calls. So far, we have not received a response.
Chelsea Beimfohr at WANF TV, CBS 46 with that story. And here I was thinking all along when I was arguing against the $120 million expense of building the Atlanta Public Safety Training Facility outside city limits, outside Fulton County in unincorporated DeKalb County. Here I was thinking, well, Fulton County wants to build a similar facility. Why doesn't the city and Fulton County work together? And we can't even agree on how to handle animal control. So, okay, maybe that was a poor idea. No, it's not a poor idea. It's a fantastic idea. The problem is we've got some dysfunction between the two government entities. And the mayor, who, by the way, had plenty to say about 50,000 people showing up to a women's soccer event over the weekend, had nothing to say about this. This is kind of a big deal, y'all. And you know how I learned about this? The Nextdoor app, for God's sakes. Kalisa Wade made a post in the Brookwood area. She says, what does this mean? It means that as an Atlanta resident, any calls you make for stray or loose dogs will be answered by APD, who has nothing else to do. They're not already stretched thin, right? And brought to an unknown location instead of the new Fulton County Animal Shelter, which, by the way, is fantastic. Any lost or found dog, surrendered animal, or animal picked up for cruelty, neglect in the city of Atlanta will no longer be able to be taken in by the new shelter. Any calls to investigate cruelty or neglect will have to be handled by an already stretched APD force instead of a dedicated and experienced Fulton County Animal Control Unit. So to dig a little bit deeper into this, there's an increase in the fee that the cities inside Fulton County are being asked to pay to cover cost increases. I mean, it's happened to all of us, right? It cost increase, and they just built a new facility, a nice new facility to handle the volume of animal control calls. Of the 15 cities in Fulton County, Lisa Wade writes, of the 15 cities in Fulton County, the city of Atlanta is the only one that refused to cover the new cost. Now we're pinching pennies. Now we want to pinch pennies when we're going to throw $120 million at an Atlanta public safety training facility that we could have spent, I don't know, maybe half of and worked in conjunction with Fulton County, who also is building one as well, to handle that. But now we want to pinch pennies and argue about the cost of things with Fulton County. Apoplectic. We'll be following that story. It's going to do it for today's Ron Show. Thank you for listening on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, replay 5 to 6 p.m., and on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com. Show notes, RonShowATL.com. See you tomorrow.